I'm Nora Whitfield, 31 years old, and on the night I unlocked my dream, every chair I set gleamed under candlelight and waited for people who never walked through the door. I kept telling myself to stop checking the entryway, but the hinges whispered hope each time. The room smelled like rosemary and warm bread, soft music slipping through the speakers, and I had handwritten place cards for the 4 people I wanted most to see. I poured water reset napkins, adjusted a fork by half an inch, anything to keep my hands from trembling. Outside, the streetlights made silver ladders on the wet pavement after a late afternoon shower. Inside the lemon tart, I baked last, sat on the counter bright as a harvest moon and untouched. At 9, the phone on my host stand buzzed and lit the ceiling with its glow. By 10, the candles burned lower and the glass door reflected only me. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever had to stand tall when someone doubted you, tap like and subscribe, so I know you're here with me. I grew up in a small rental on the edge of town where kitchens were the heart of our days. My grandmother Evelyn taught me that food is how you tell the truth when words falter, and she'd slide a handwritten recipe card across the table like a blessing. My parents praised effort that showed up on report cards and scoreboards, and my brother Evan always had a trophy to polish or a title taped to the fridge. I didn't mind being the one with flour on my shirt and a notebook full of menus not at first. We didn't have much, but we had a kind of practicality that made everything feel possible if you were willing to work and keep the lights low when the bill was high. I learned to stretch butter to make a Sunday roast feed, Monday sandwiches, and Tuesday soup, and to read the faces of people I loved more closely than recipes. Those were the values I carried, the kind that make you take your time, keep your word, and leave a kitchen cleaner than you found it. When I finally stepped into the world I'd sketched for years, everything around me cost more and moved faster. Vendors spoke in minimums, permits came in stacks, and the space I leased from Samuel Green was a narrow brick room with good bones and terrible wiring. I spent months painting, sanding, choosing secondhand chairs that felt solid in the hand, and setting a menu I could execute without a safety net. The cooks I hired believed in the kind of quiet excellence I wanted, no theatrics, just good technique and clean plates, while the servers practiced moving like steady water through the aisle. It felt like stepping from a porch into a river, the current strong but steady if you watched your footing. I told myself that if I could make the food honest and the room warm, people would feel it, even the ones who had never understood why I needed a stove more than a cubicle. What I wanted from my family that night wasn't applause. It was a presence that said, "We see you." I set 4 place settings by the window, simple white plates, a sprig of thyme on each napkin, glasses polished until they caught the light and threw it back. I chose songs that reminded me of Sunday mornings when my mother hummed over pancake batter, and I kept the volume low enough to hear the door when it opened. I practiced the greeting I would use when they arrived, not formal, not grand, just familiar and proud. The neighborhood filled steadily with voices and footsteps, and the first wave of guests came and went, a happy blur of satisfied plates and folded checks. Midnight prep had always been my favorite, the quiet reset. But on an opening night, there's a different silence, one that asks a question you don't want to answer. By 8:30, the candles were little boats of light in their holders, and the lemon tart held its gloss like it was still cooling. I had made that recipe with Evelyn the week before, her hands guiding mine on the lattice, like we were stitching a memory we could keep. I stepped outside for air and watched cars slide by under the street lamps, the city breathing in long, even strides. A couple from 2 blocks over pressed their faces to the glass and smiled, then walked in for dessert, and I felt grateful for strangers who chose us simply because we were here. I boxed a slice to take to my grandmother after closing, already picturing her at the table with her tea and that little nod she gives when the lemon hits just right. Behind me, a chair creaked in the empty corner I had reserved for my family, and the sound made me turn even though I knew better. I had promised myself I wouldn't read meaning into every small noise, but meaning sneaks in when your heart is open wide enough to seat 4. The kitchen was calm, the line wiped down knives aligned, the last pot rinsed and left to dry at an angle so no water pooled. Renee hung her apron on the back hook and wished me good night, her voice kind and even, and the door clicked softly behind her. I stood in the middle of the room and listened to the playlist drift into a song my mother used to hum without thinking the melody so familiar it felt like a hand on my shoulder. The phone buzzed again on the host stand, a bright rectangle in the dark, and a notification swelled across the screen, bright, insistent, and impossible to ignore. I picked it up, already bracing for the message I had tried not to expect, and as the video began to play in my hand, the room around me seemed to hold its breath. The video on my phone played in shaky light faces, lit by a string of bulbs, swaying over a backyard crowded with laughter. Evan stood behind a sheet cake that said, "Congratulations, Regional Manager," a paper crown tilted on his head. Someone clapped out of rhythm while another raised a red plastic cup, and my parents swayed to an old rock song like they didn't have anywhere else to be. Behind them, the same people who had texted me, "Good luck tonight," just hours before now, cheered as if the whole world revolved around my brother's new title. I watched long enough to see my mother cut the first slice, her bracelet catching the light. Then I set the phone face down on the counter, the screen still glowing beneath my hand. The dining room was nearly silent now, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the last candle flickering on the far table. I walked through the room collecting glasses that no one had used, straightening chairs that hadn't been touched. Each clink of glass felt louder than the one before. I had imagined this night so many times, Dad in his suit, Mom with her polite smile, Evan teasing me over appetizers. But the room stayed empty, and the playlist that once felt comforting now sounded hollow. I glanced at the tart on the counter, the one I'd made just the way Evan used to ask for, with a thinner crust and a sharp lemon finish. Not a single fork had cut into it. At 10:17, my phone buzzed again. A text from my father read, "We should talk about what you owe the family for that restaurant. No congratulations. No apology. Just a ledger entry in place of love." I stared at the words until they blurred. Years of being the extra hand, the backup, the one who cooked, cleaned, and stayed late when everyone else left early, it all sat there between the lines. I typed a dozen responses and deleted each one. The truth was simpler than anger could express. They hadn't forgotten. They had chosen not to come. Growing up, Evan's name was always in bold print in our house. His trophies lined the mantel, his degrees framed on the wall above the piano. My parents introduced him with a kind of pride that made rooms stand still. And when they turned to me, their tone softened into something polite, distant, like they were humoring a child who still hadn't found a real career. Our creative one, Mom would say, as if the word creative meant unreliable. Dad's praise came as faint as smoke. "You've got a touch for it," he'd tell me when I cooked, always with a smile that never reached his eyes. I told myself for years that it didn't matter that family didn't need to understand what they couldn't see. But standing in that dim dining room, watching their celebration light up my phone, I realized I'd been pretending their silence was neutral. It wasn't. It was rejection rehearsed and repeated until I learned to carry it like it was part of me. I leaned against the counter, the lemon tart beside me, and felt the first flicker of something colder than sadness. Maybe I was done waiting. I took a slow breath, opened the text thread with my father, and typed a single sentence. My thumb hovered for a moment before I sent it. Effective immediately, the restaurant is closed to all family, no reservations, no discounts, no exceptions. The message delivered with a soft ping that echoed in the quiet. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then the phone started vibrating again. First a call from Mom, then another from Dad, then Evan, over and over until the screen filled with missed calls and half-written voicemails. I turned it face down again, wiped my hands on a towel, and began locking up. The knock at the back door came just as I was turning off the last light. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The rhythm 3, sharp knocks, a pause. Then one more hadn't changed since we were kids. Evan stood outside under the alley light, a cake box in one hand, the other shoved into his pocket. His shirt was pressed his tie loose, and he smelled like cologne and beer. I hesitated before unlocking the door. The night air rushed in first, carrying the faint sound of a distant song. "Figured you'd want a piece," he said, lifting the box with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Inside, I could see the white frosting and the blue letters, "To bigger things." I crossed my arms. Bigger things, huh? Guess this place didn't count. His grin faltered. Come on, Nora. We didn't think it was that big of a deal. Dad said it was more of a soft launch. I let the words sit there a moment. A soft launch, I repeated quietly. I texted Mom 3 times. I made your favorite dessert, Evan. It sat here for 5 hours. He looked away. People got busy. I stepped closer. No. People got lazy. People made choices. And every one of you chose not to show up. His jaw tightened, the practiced charm fading from his face. Dad wants to invest, he said suddenly. He sees potential now. He asked me to talk to you. There it was, the real reason for the late-night visit. Not guilt, not family, business. I didn't raise my voice. Tell Dad the restaurant's fully funded, I said, and the investor bought exclusive rights to my loyalty. He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I reached for the trash bag by the door. It means you're late, and I don't do leftovers. The bag hit the dumpster with a sharp thud that broke the silence. Evan took a half step back. Don't make this some big drama. We're family. I met his eyes. Exactly. That's why it hurts more. Then I shut the door. His footsteps faded into the alley, slow and uneven, until all I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator again. The next morning I changed the locks, not just at the restaurant, but at my apartment too. For years I'd been the easy one. Nora, can we store boxes at your place? Nora, can I borrow your car until Monday? Every yes came with the quiet hope that it might earn a little affection. But love that only shows up when it needs a favor isn't love. I printed a small sign and taped it inside the front window before the lunch rush. Due to overwhelming support, reservations only. No walk-ins accepted even if we share DNA. By noon, a local blogger had taken a photo. By evening, it had spread across social media like wildfire. Comments flooded in, people cheering others, sharing their own stories of being the forgotten child. The phrase that stuck with me came from someone I didn't know. Boundaries taste better than betrayal. Orders started filling up that same night, the dining room full again, not with family, but with strangers who looked at me like they understood. Mom called 5 times, leaving one message. Nora, this is childish. We made a mistake, but you're making it worse. I let it play once and deleted it. Around 6, a couple from out of state arrived, their accents soft, their eyes bright. We canceled another reservation to eat here, the woman said as she settled into her chair. I smiled and poured their water. For the first time, the room felt right. When I caught my reflection in the front window, I didn't see the overlooked daughter or the one waiting for approval. I saw someone who had stopped asking for it. 2 days later, the next knock came, but it wasn't at the restaurant, it was at my apartment door. Through the peephole, I saw my father's suit jacket wrinkled at the edges. His tie loosened, a look I'd never seen on him before. He wasn't there to celebrate or apologize. He was there because control was slipping. I stood on the other side of the door, my hand resting on the knob, knowing that once I opened it, nothing between us would ever look the same again. Through the peephole, my father looked smaller than I remembered. His posture wasn't as straight, and the suit he wore had creases that didn't belong to the man who once pressed everything twice. I let him stand there longer than I meant to, the hallway light pooling around his shoes, before I finally opened the door halfway. He didn't wait for an invitation. "Let's be adults about this," he said, glancing past me like he expected to see someone else inside. I leaned against the frame. "You want to talk? We can talk right here." His sigh carried the weight of someone used to control. "Your mother's upset. Evan's confused. We all are." His voice softened, but it was the same softness he used when closing a deal. "Confused about what I asked? That I finally stopped begging for a seat at your table?" He frowned as if the question didn't deserve an answer. "This is ridiculous. We're not enemies." "No," I said quietly. "You're just people who forget I exist unless I'm footing the bill or cooking the meal." The words hit harder than I expected, and for a moment he didn't speak. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of papers held together by a binder clip. "I was going to help you," he said, his voice flattening. "I looked into some financing." "You mean equity?" I said, catching the edge of the papers before he could hand them over. His eyes narrowed. "Don't be paranoid." I stepped back into the apartment, grabbed a manila envelope from the console, and handed it to him. "Here's the deed," I said. "The restaurant, the LLC, the recipes, they're all in my name." His eyes flicked down the page, scanning fast. "You got a lawyer, I got a team," I said. "Funny what happens when you stop waiting for permission." He muttered something about burning bridges. I kept my tone even. "Then I'll learn to swim." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between us, and then he slipped the envelope back inside, muttering a goodbye that didn't sound like one. The door closed behind him, and I stood still listening to the sound of his shoes fading down the hallway. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt quiet, like the noise had finally left the room. 2 nights later, just as I was closing up, the back door of the restaurant rattled. When I opened it, Paige stood there, Evan's fiancée. Her hair was tied up, her face pale. She clutched her phone like it was proof of something. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, glancing over her shoulder, as though someone had followed her. I let her in, motioning toward the corner booth. She sat down, her hands trembling, and slid the phone across the table. "They created a group chat," she said quietly. "Your dad, your mom, Evan, even your Aunt Linda and cousin Mark. They called it Project Reset." I didn't speak. "The plan was to push you into selling or make you fail. Bad reviews, suppliers dropping you, it's all coordinated." She scrolled through messages, screenshots, voice notes, timestamps. Each one another small betrayal, but together they formed something deliberate. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Her voice cracked. "Because they dragged me into it, and because I can't marry someone who treats his sister like this." I watched the messages flicker across the screen. Phrases like "she's emotional," "we'll make her see reason, if the suppliers pull, she'll cave." The air around us felt colder. Paige looked at me like she wanted permission to breathe. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I nodded. "You didn't write those messages." She exhaled a shaking breath. "They'll hate me for telling you." "They already decided who to hate," I said softly. "You just changed the direction." She left soon after, pulling her coat tight as she disappeared down the alley. I locked the door behind her, the weight of the bolt heavier than usual. I knew I wouldn't sleep that night. At dawn, I found Grandma Evelyn at her kitchen table, her thin hands steady over a pair of scissors, clipping coupons with slow precision. Sunlight striped the room through half-open blinds. "You're up early," she said without looking up. I sat across from her, and for a while neither of us spoke. The smell of coffee filled the small space. Finally, I asked Grandma, "Did Dad ever pressure you about money?" Her hands paused, the scissors still open between her fingers. "He's always had ideas," she murmured. "Investments, plans." She hesitated. "But I never thought he'd drag you into them. That was answer enough." She pushed a plate of toast toward me, butter softening at the edges. "Eat," she said gently. I did, even though my stomach was tight. It struck me that she was the only one who never looked at me like I owed her something. By afternoon, I was back at the restaurant sorting through invoices when the first blow landed. My supplier called, voice cautious. "Nora, your father said you're behind on payments. He asked us to pull your account." I froze. "That's not true," I said. "Check your records." There was a pause, the shuffle of paper. "I did. You're ahead." But he sounded convincing. Convincing. That was my father's art. I hung up, staring at the order sheets spread across my desk. Each page represented a delivery that kept my business running, and now all of it could unravel because of one phone call. That evening, I met with Avery, my attorney. Her office smelled of paper and peppermint tea. She listened without interrupting, her brow furrowed as she flipped through the screenshots Paige had sent. "This isn't family drama," she said finally. "This is organized interference, harassment, possibly fraud." My throat felt dry. "What can we do?" She set her pen down. "We start with a cease and desist. Then we build a case. Elder financial abuse, attempted coercion, defamation. But we'll need a witness." Paige's face came back to me, pale and shaking. "She'll testify," I said. "She knows the truth." Avery nodded. "Good. Then we move carefully. Let them think they're winning. We'll watch, gather evidence, and when they return from that trip they're on, we'll be ready." For the first time in weeks, I slept for more than an hour. It wasn't peace exactly. It was purpose. The plan wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. I kept working, though. The weight of silence around Grandma grew heavier each day. She watered her roses, trimmed the edges of her garden, but her shoulders had started to slope as if the air itself pressed down on her. When the phone rang and Mom's name flashed across the screen, she didn't answer. She didn't defend herself, and I didn't ask her to. One evening, I found her sitting by the window with an old photograph from Evan's high school graduation. The whole family smiled, arms linked except me, half cut off at the edge. "Maybe I should call them," she whispered. "No," I said quickly. "They don't want to fix this. They want to erase it. They want to erase me." She nodded slowly, slipping the photo back into its frame. A week later, another call came, this one from Daniel, my accountant. "Nora," he said, his voice careful. "Your supplier accounts are still intact, but a few deposits from family-linked investors were flagged." He didn't need to say who flagged them. The pattern was clear. They weren't done. I hung up and sat at the counter of my own restaurant, the dining room empty for the night, the lights dimmed to soft gold. I took out a notebook and wrote across the top page, "We protect this space." Under it, I listed the names of every employee, every vendor, every person who stood beside me when others turned away. By the time I set my pen down, I realized my handwriting didn't shake anymore. That night, I walked through the quiet restaurant, the faint scent of garlic and lemons still in the air. My staff had gone home hours ago, and the city outside had settled into the kind of stillness that only comes after a long rain. I looked around at what I had built, every chair, every detail, and knew that the next step wouldn't be taken in the dark. It would be taken in daylight, where everyone could see. Because the moment my family came back into town, they wouldn't find the same daughter they left behind. They'd find someone ready to meet them head on. When the news came that my family had flown out for a vacation, I felt a strange calm settle over me. They were posting photos, drinks on the beach wide, smiles, captions about new beginnings. Each picture felt like proof they believed they'd already won. Avery's voice echoed in my mind from our last meeting, "Let them think they're ahead. It makes them careless." So while they lounged under palm trees, I built my case. Days bled into one another. The restaurant stayed steady, reservations climbing, customers returning. And behind that calm rhythm, I gathered every shred of evidence I could find. I saved screenshots of reviews that used the same words in the same order. I matched fake names to empty reservation slots. Each pattern was another thread pulled from the same fabric. Avery had her paralegal notarize everything. Daniel helped cross-check accounts. By the end of the week, my binder was an inch thick. At night, the silence in Grandma Evelyn's house felt heavier. She tried to keep her routine folding laundry, watering plants, but there was a tiredness in her movements that hadn't been there before. One evening, I found her sitting on the porch in her sweater, the same one she'd worn for decades, her hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. The porch light flickered, catching the lines in her face. "You should sleep, Grandma," I said gently. She nodded, eyes still on the street. "I just keep thinking," she whispered. They weren't raised to be cruel. Her words hung there, soft and broken, and I didn't know how to answer. I sat beside her, letting the night air fill the silence. The next morning I went in early, unlocking the front door before sunrise. The dining room was still dark, chairs stacked, the scent of last night's rosemary still faint in the air. Renee arrived not long after, rubbing sleep from her eyes and setting down her coffee. "You've been here all night, haven't you?" she asked. I smiled, though it didn't reach far. "Just getting ready." She hesitated. "We've got your back, you know. All of us." Her voice caught slightly. "You're stronger than them." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Sometimes support comes from the quietest corners. By the end of that week, the smear campaign had spread wider. Identical one-star reviews. Whispers about staff attitude that didn't match any of my logs. Daniel printed side-by-side copies for me to mark up. Each phrase repeated like a pattern on cheap wallpaper. Food was cold, staff was rude, not worth the hype, none of it true. I refused to panic. I adjusted menus, refined service flow, and reminded everyone to keep their heads high. "We don't feed rumors," I told the staff during our meeting. "We feed people. That's what stays." Late Friday night, Avery called. "They're back in town," she said. "We're ready whenever you are." I felt my pulse quicken, but didn't answer right away. Through the restaurant window, I could see couples strolling under the streetlights, their laughter echoing faintly. Life was still happening outside my little war. "Then we'll do it soon," I said finally, "when they least expect it." The next morning, I drove to Grandma's with a basket of croissants. She was in the kitchen clipping roses, her hands steady again, her movements more purposeful than they'd been in days. "You're up early," she said with a faint smile. I poured us coffee and told her about the plan, how Avery would handle it, how every step was by the book. She listened quietly, nodding every so often. When I finished, she placed her hand over mine. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly. "But promise me something. Don't let their bitterness become your language." I squeezed her hand. "I won't." It was the closest thing to peace I'd felt in months. 2 days later, I was back at the restaurant when Renee hurried in from the front, her face pale. "There's someone here asking for you," she said. "Looks nervous." When I stepped into the dining room, I saw Paige standing near the entrance, clutching her purse. Her eyes darted around like she expected my family to appear behind her. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I led her to a corner booth. She sat down and pulled out her phone again. "They're planning something else," she said. "Your father's been making calls. He's trying to claim ownership, saying the restaurant was a family venture. He's reaching out to suppliers again." Her voice trembled. "He told Evan it's time to reset the narrative." I exhaled slowly. "Did he say what that means?" Paige nodded. "He wants to show up at your place. All of them. To confront you before you can act." For a moment, the noise from the kitchen pots clanging orders being called felt distant, like it belonged to another world. "Thank you for telling me," I said. She wiped her eyes. "They'll never forgive me for this." "Then it's time you forgive yourself first," I said. She nodded and stood to leave, shoulders squared as if she'd just made her own quiet decision. That night, I called Avery. "They're coming," I said. "Tomorrow or the day after." She didn't hesitate. "Then we'll meet them on our terms." We set the plan for the airport, where they'd have nowhere to hide behind walls or doors. I barely slept, pacing between rooms, the air thick with anticipation. Around 3 a.m, I stopped by the restaurant again. The lights were off except for the glow from the kitchen. I stood in the center of the dining room, listening to the hum of the refrigerators, the steady rhythm of something I'd built from scratch. Every tile, every table, every choice had my fingerprints on it. They could try to take the story, but not the truth. Before sunrise, I drove to Grandma's one more time. She was already awake, sitting by the window with her tea. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. "You're doing it today." "Yes," I said. She reached for my hand, her fingers cool but steady. "Then hold your ground. Don't let them see you shake." I promised her I wouldn't. She handed me a single rose from the vase on the table. "For after," she said, "when the noise is gone." I tucked it carefully into my bag. The day they landed, the air felt heavier than usual, clouds rolling low over the city. I met Avery at the airport 2 hours before their flight. She was calm, professional, her folder of documents pressed to her chest like armor. We waited near the arrivals gate, the noise of suitcases and chatter rising and falling around us. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a glass panel. Tired eyes, steady posture, a face that looked older than it had a year ago, but also stronger. The overhead speaker announced their flight, and a wave of passengers began spilling out. Families hugged, children ran to parents, couples kissed at the barrier. Then I saw them. My father leading suitcase in hand, my mother trailing behind her, sunglasses perched like a shield. Evan followed, scrolling on his phone, grinning. They spotted me almost immediately. Dad's step slowed, his expression tightening. Avery took a small step forward, her voice clear and even. "Whitfield, you've been served." She extended the envelope. He froze mid-step, the movement around us slowing as travelers began to notice. I saw the exact second realization hit his face, the shift from confidence to disbelief. And as he reached for the papers, the air around us seemed to still completely. That was the moment everything began to turn, not with shouting or chaos, but with silence sharp enough to cut through the crowd. The confrontation that followed would echo far beyond that gate, But standing there with the envelope between us and the world watching, I finally knew he couldn't rewrite my story again. The airport hum carried a rhythm of rolling suitcases, echoing footsteps and voices overlapping in waves. I stood near the arrivals gate beside Avery, her folder tucked beneath her arm, the envelope sealed and heavy with weeks of preparation. My heart didn't race. It held steady, almost calm, the way it does when you've rehearsed a truth for so long that saying it out loud becomes the only thing left to do. The crowd thinned, and then I saw them, my father first pulling a sleek suitcase, shoulders squared, and chin lifted like he was walking into a board meeting. My mother followed her lips, pressed tight sunglasses resting on her head. Evan came last, tanned from vacation, scrolling through his phone, with that same unbothered grin I remembered from every family argument that wasn't his to solve. When they spotted me, their pace slowed. Avery stepped forward and spoke clearly. "Mr. Whitfield, you've been served." The envelope extended between them, the noise around us dimming, as if the terminal itself took a breath. My father froze, confusion flickering across his face before pride took over again. "This is ridiculous," he said, his tone controlled. "You think you can drag your own family through the mud? Over what hurt feelings I didn't raise my voice, over fraud, over harassment, over trying to destroy something you couldn't own." Mom glanced around, noticing the small crowd beginning to form phones already out. "Stop making a scene," she hissed. "We can handle this at home." "No," I said, keeping my voice even. "Home is where you forget I exist. Home is where Evan gets a party while my restaurant sits empty." I gestured to Avery beside me. "This is where accountability happens." Evan's grin faltered, replaced by something closer to irritation. "Don't act like you're some victim," he said. "You shut us out first." I met his eyes. Family doesn't get shut out of places they never showed up for. The words settled between us like dust after a storm. My father's jaw tightened and he pointed toward me. "You're burning bridges you'll regret." I stepped closer until his finger hovered inches from my chest. "Then I'll learn to swim." Avery didn't flinch. "Any further interference, and we escalate legally?" she said, her voice steady and calm. My father's hand lowered. He rifled through the envelope, his face tightening, as the notarized documents caught his eye, screenshots, testimonies the group chat page had exposed. Mom tugged his arm. "Let's go," she muttered, glancing at the phones recording around us. Evan shook his head, mumbling something under his breath, but his eyes gave him away unease, replacing the arrogance he'd worn for years. My father's voice dropped to a growl. "You're making enemies you don't need." "No," I said softly. "I'm protecting myself from enemies I didn't choose." Silence lingered for one long moment before they turned away, their footsteps swallowed by the noise of the terminal. Avery touched my elbow. "You did it," she said quietly. I watched their backs disappear into the crowd. "No," I said. "We did." The next morning, the story broke online. A local business journalist ran the headline, "Chef Files Legal Action Against Family for Attempted Sabotage." The article didn't sensationalize. It told the truth, how my father had tried to pressure suppliers, how Evan joined in, how the smear campaign unraveled under scrutiny. Screenshots appeared, time-stamped and undeniable. Page's name was there too, alongside a statement confirming the message's authenticity. Within hours, the story spread farther than I ever expected. Stand. With Nora trended by afternoon. Old friends reached out, former colleagues, even customers I'd only met once. The comments weren't pity, they were solidarity. "Happened to me too. Proud of you for standing up." Strangers booked tables weeks in advance. By evening, the restaurant was full, the sound of laughter echoing through every corner. Plates left, empty glasses clinked, and the air felt alive again. My staff worked like a single heartbeat, steady, focused, proud. 3 nights later, after closing the door, opened quietly. Paige stepped inside, her eyes rimmed red, but her chin lifted. I motioned her toward a booth. She sat twisting her hands together. "They're furious," she said softly. "They've called me a traitor. But I couldn't marry into that." I met her gaze. "You did the right thing." She shook her head. "All I did was tell the truth. You're the one who stood up to them." She stayed for coffee, and when she left, she hugged me once, careful but sure, before walking out into the night. The weeks that followed moved quickly. Avery filed the full-suit financial interference, harassment, attempted coercion. The court date came sooner than expected. I arrived with Avery on one side and Grandma Evelyn on the other, her small hand looped through my arm. My father sat across the room, stone-faced his lawyer, whispering into his ear. Evan avoided eye contact. My mother kept her gaze fixed on the table. When the judge entered, the air in the courtroom shifted heavy with something final. The hearing lasted hours, evidence unfolding piece by piece. Avery spoke calmly, guiding each exhibit through the record. The group chat, the supplier statements, the mirrored reviews, all of it built a line they couldn't cross back over. My father's lawyer objected again and again, but the documents spoke louder than words. When the judge delivered the ruling, his voice was clear and even. Financial interference and attempted coercion of family assets will not be tolerated. Grandma's money was placed under protection. My business ownership confirmed in full. My family's petition for joint rights dismissed with prejudice. When the gavel struck, the sound echoed through me like a door closing. My father's complexion drained. Evan sat motionless, his jaw-tight fists clenched. My mother cried quietly, a tissue pressed to her lips. But the tears weren't for me. They were for what they'd lost control of. Avery touched my arm. "It's over," she whispered. Outside, the sun was sharp and bright, the courthouse steps warm under my shoes. Grandma's hand still rested in the crook of my arm. "You saved us," she said softly. I looked at her, the lines of her face deeper than I remembered, but her eyes shining. "No," I said. "I finally saved myself." That afternoon, we went back to her house. She moved through the garden with slow purpose, trimming her roses. Each cut of her shears sounded clean, certain. When she handed me a fresh bloom, it felt lighter than air. "You did what I never could," she said. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The sky stretched wide above us, blue and clear. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in the quiet of the restaurant, the lights dim, the scent of baked bread still in the air. The tables gleamed, the kind of clean that comes after a storm has passed. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to check the door or wait for footsteps that would never come. Tomorrow, the papers would print the ruling. Tomorrow, the world would know for certain what truth had been hiding beneath the surface. But tonight, all I wanted was this stillness, this breath between endings and beginnings. I poured myself a glass of water, walked to the window and watched the street outside, calm, ordinary, unremarkable. Somewhere beyond the city lights, my father was probably making new plans, my brother finding new excuses. But inside these walls, I had built something they couldn't touch. The night air was cool through the cracked window, carrying the faint scent of rain. I knew it wouldn't stay quiet forever. Stories like this rarely end cleanly, but for now, peace was enough. Tomorrow would bring its own noise, and I would be ready to meet it head-on. The weeks after the ruling blurred into something steady, almost quiet. My name appeared in headlines, then faded into smaller columns as the next story took its place. But the restaurant never slowed. Each night, the dining room filled couples celebrating anniversaries, friends sharing stories, tourists who had read about what happened and wanted to see for themselves. The laughter came back. The sound of plates clinking, glasses touching it, felt like music I'd been waiting years to hear. Jordan Pike, the journalist who'd first written about the case, stopped by one evening. He waited until the rush eased, then asked if I had a few minutes. We sat by the window while the last diners lingered over dessert. "The public still talks about your story," he said. "It's more than business to them, it's about boundaries." I smiled lightly. "Then maybe that's what we're really serving here." He jotted something down and asked for a quote for his next article. I didn't have anything prepared, but the words came easily. "You can lose everything you thought you needed and still find peace in what's yours to keep." He nodded, thanked me, and left the bell on the door chiming softly behind him. By the next morning, that quote was everywhere, shared, reposted, printed in local newsletters. Customers started repeating it back to me as they ordered. I didn't know how to respond to that kind of attention, so I just kept cooking. Every night when I locked up, I thought of Grandma Evelyn sitting by her window, her roses catching the light. I brought her leftover pastries every Sunday, and she always saved the last bite for me. "You finally made it," she'd say, her voice warm and teasing. I'd laugh knowing she meant more than the restaurant. But even in that new calm, memories surfaced, small things I hadn't let myself think about before. I remembered the nights my father would tell me I didn't understand responsibility, or how Evan joked that my little food hobby would fade once the bills came due. Those echoes still floated through the edges of my thoughts. I learned to let them pass like background noise. Avery called it post-storm quiet, the kind that feels almost too still after months of fighting. About 3 months after the court's decision, a letter arrived. It wasn't from my family, but from the attorney handling my grandmother's estate. Enclosed was an update confirming what the judge had ruled. Her finances were fully secured, with me listed as her joint protector. It also stated in clean black print that my father and brother were officially removed from all claims. I stared at the page for a long time, the reality finally settling. I had fought for more than ownership. I had protected her too. When I showed Grandma the letter, her eyes filled with quiet relief. She folded it neatly and tucked it into her desk drawer. "That's one less thing to lose sleep over," she said, closing the drawer with care. "You gave me peace, Nora." I wanted to tell her she'd given me the same thing, but words caught somewhere behind my throat. Instead, I poured us tea and watched her hum softly as she arranged fresh flowers in a vase. Around that time, I started noticing a different kind of crowd coming in. Young chef students from the culinary school a few miles away. Some came to eat, others asked for advice. One evening, a woman about my age approached the counter while I was wiping it down. "I saw what you went through," she said quietly. "I thought about giving up on my dream, but your story changed that." She handed me a folded note, her hand trembling slightly. Later, I read it in the kitchen. It said, "Thank you for proving that standing alone doesn't mean you're lost." I kept that note in my office drawer. The restaurant became more than a business. It became a place where people came to start over. Renee, my server, began leading a small training program on weekends for single parents interested in hospitality work. Daniel helped us structure it properly, making sure everything stayed above board. Avery dropped by occasionally, always checking that no new legal shadows followed me. "You built something honest," she said once, flipping through her files. "That's harder than winning any case." One evening after a long day, I found Grandma asleep in her favorite chair, a crossword open in her lap. The television hummed low, playing a black and white movie. I draped a blanket over her and looked around the room that had been the same for decades, family photos, soft light, the smell of lavender and tea. For the first time, it felt like all of it belonged to safety, not fear. A few days later, Evan showed up outside the restaurant. I spotted him through the front window, standing by the curb with his hands in his pockets. His face looked drawn thinner. He waited until the last table cleared, then stepped inside. "You look busy," he said. His voice was quiet, almost uncertain. I didn't answer, just motioned toward an empty booth. He sat across from me, glancing around. "I'm not here to start anything," he said. Paige left. I guess I deserved that. I folded my hands, waiting. I didn't come for sympathy. I just wanted to say I didn't think it would go that far. He looked down at the table. "Dad said it was business, not personal." I should have known better. I didn't raise my voice. "You all made choices. That's what grown people do." He nodded. "Yeah, choices." His eyes lifted to mine. "I can't fix what we did, but I hope someday you'll believe I'm sorry." I studied him for a moment, then stood up. "You don't need me to believe it," I said. "You just need to live it." He nodded once quietly, then left. I didn't watch him go. That night I stayed late cleaning. The kitchen lights cast soft circles across the tile, and the city outside had gone still. I thought about how apologies like storms could pass without warning, but still leave the air changed. I didn't feel anger anymore, just distance. What once burned now felt like ashes cooling into soil. A week later, the paper ran a follow-up piece, From Family Feud to Foundation Chef Whitfield Turns Conflict into Community. The headline made me laugh a little, but the content was true enough. Jordan wrote about the training program, the steady growth, and how the restaurant had become a symbol of rebuilding. He ended the piece with a line that made my chest tighten. Sometimes justice doesn't end in a courtroom, it ends in peace. The morning after the article came out, Grandma walked into the restaurant for the first time since everything happened. The lunch crowd quieted when she entered, an elegant woman in her pale blue cardigan, her steps measured but sure. I guided her to the corner table by the window. She looked around, smiling softly at the hum of voices and clatter of dishes. "Looks like you found your rhythm," she said. "It finally feels like home," I answered. She reached across the table and took my hand. "Then maybe it's time to stop surviving," she said gently, "and start living." That evening after closing, I turned off the lights and stood in the darkened dining room, the smell of bread and citrus still hanging in the air. Outside, the street glowed under soft rain. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing in the shadow of something broken. I was simply standing in my life. Tomorrow would bring another day, another set of meals, another chance to build something steady. But tonight, I locked the door, exhaled, and let the sound of the rain remind me that peace doesn't arrive with noise. It settles in silence. The first morning after the article ran, I found a line stretching from the door to the sidewalk. People clutched umbrellas against the drizzle, laughing softly as they waited. Inside the kitchen buzzed with a rhythm that felt new, steady, confident, alive. Renee passed out menus like she'd been doing it for years, her voice carrying over the hum of conversation. The air smelled of butter and citrus, the same scent that used to make me ache now, filling me with something close to peace. By afternoon, Jordan came by again. He took a stool at the counter and ordered the lemon tart. "You're going to run out at this rate," he said with a smile. "That would be a good problem," I replied. When he finished eating, he leaned forward. "People love your food, but it's your story that keeps them here." I didn't answer right away. He was right, but I didn't want this place to be about loss anymore. I wanted it to be about what grew after it. That night, I stayed long after closing, polishing silverware under the soft kitchen lights. The dining room was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. My grandmother's rose from her visit sat in a small glass near the register petals, just beginning to curl. I thought about how far we'd come from that first empty night to this full one. For the first time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. The following week, the court's final paperwork arrived in a plain envelope. Avery stopped by to drop it off herself. "It's all official," she said, tapping the folder on the counter. "Every asset and protection clause is secure." I thanked her and she smiled faintly. "It's been a long road, Nora. Be proud of yourself." She hesitated at the door. "Your father's attorney tried to appeal the removal from your grandmother's estate. The judge denied it this morning." I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "It's finally over then." "Yes," she said quietly. "It's over." Later that evening, Grandma came by for tea. She moved slower these days, but her eyes carried the same spark they always had. I poured her chamomile and told her the news. She listened, then nodded. "You gave us our peace," she said. "I didn't do it alone," I told her. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Maybe not, but you were the one who stood when everyone else sat down." As she sipped her tea, she looked around the room, her gaze landing on a framed newspaper clipping that Jordan had sent after the first story went viral. It showed a picture of me behind the counter, smiling faintly, a line of text beneath it reading, "From overlooked daughter to self-made chef." Grandma tilted her head. "You never stopped showing up even when they didn't." Her words were soft but carried weight. We sat in the quiet for a while, the sound of rain tapping against the windows. When she stood to leave, she hugged me tighter than usual. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," she whispered. Watching her walk out, I realized how small she seemed against the doorway, and how much she'd carried all these years without saying a word. In the weeks that followed, everything settled into a new rhythm. The smear campaign that had once threatened me had dissolved completely. Suppliers who had once hesitated to work with me now reached out first. My staff grew to include 2 new apprentices from the culinary program nearby, both recommended by Jordan after his feature on our training initiative. Renee taught them with patient hands, guiding them through every step. The kitchen had become a place of calm noise, yes, but no chaos. Then one morning, a letter arrived, addressed to me in my father's handwriting. The envelope was crisp, the kind he used for business correspondence. I stood behind the counter for a long time before opening it. Inside was a short note. "You won. Hope it was worth it." I folded it once and dropped it into the waste bin. It didn't sting like I thought it would. It just sounded like a man who had run out of control and didn't know what to do without it. A few days later, Evan stopped by again, this time alone and without pretense. He ordered a coffee and waited until the crowd thinned. "I read the new article," he said quietly. "You deserve the success." His tone wasn't defensive or proud, just tired. I nodded, unsure what to say. "Paige reached out to Mom," he added. "She told her you treated her kindly after everything." I met his eyes. She told the truth. That's all anyone did. He hesitated, then nodded. "I'm glad someone finally did." As he left, I noticed how different he looked from the brother I grew up with, less sure, but maybe lighter for it. I didn't know if that meant redemption, but it meant change, and that was enough. The restaurant thrived as spring turned to summer. Tourists filled the patio, and the lemon tart became our signature dish. One afternoon, a mother and daughter came in, the girl no older than 16. The mother clutched a small notebook and smiled shyly as they sat at the counter. "She wants to be a chef," she said, "but she's scared she'll never make it." The girl ducked her head cheeks pink. I smiled at her. "You know what I learned? The best meals start with doubt. It keeps your hands steady." Her mother laughed softly, and the girl looked up, eyes bright. When they left, I found a note under the plate. "If you could do it, maybe I can too." I folded it carefully and tucked it beside the first letter I'd kept from that other young woman months ago. That night after closing, I walked home under the streetlights, my apron folded over my arm. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of jasmine from the flower shop nearby. I passed the storefronts where I'd once hung flyers begging for early customers and thought of how far everything had come. When I reached my apartment, I turned on the porch light and noticed Grandma's rose had dried in its vase, the petals paper thin but still holding their color. I didn't throw it away. I just moved it to the windowsill where it could catch the morning sun. The next week, I received a letter from the culinary school. They wanted to partner on a scholarship for students who had faced family hardship or financial instability, named in part after my grandmother. They called it the Heart Table Fellowship. Reading the proposal, I could almost hear her voice, "Feed people first. The rest follows." I called her that night to tell her. She didn't say much, just a quiet laugh and a soft, "That's nice, Nora," but I could hear the pride in her silence. As summer deepened, the restaurant stayed full, the staff steady, the lights warm. Sometimes late at night, I'd stand in the empty dining room, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, and think about how many versions of myself had lived in this same space, the one who hoped, the one who hurt, the one who finally stood her ground. Each one had brought me here. The noise outside shifted with the wind, cars passing, laughter drifting up from the street. For the first time, it didn't sound distant. It sounded like life moving forward, and I was part of it. When I locked the door, I caught my reflection in the glass, tired, content, and at peace. Tomorrow would bring new stories, new faces, maybe even new challenges. But I knew now that no matter what came, I wouldn't have to fight for my place again. Still, as I turned off the last light, I couldn't help but feel that something larger was waiting just beyond the edge of this calm, something that would close the story, the way it began quietly, but with meaning that would last. Summer slipped into fall quietly, with the air cooling just enough for the windows to fog when the ovens ran all morning. The restaurant carried a rhythm of its own, now steady, familiar, alive. Every day began the same way, fresh herbs from the market, the scent of baked bread drifting through the street, and the sound of laughter rising before the first plate even left the kitchen. I had stopped waiting for something to go wrong. Peace, I learned, doesn't always arrive with ceremony. Sometimes it just settles in and stays. One afternoon, while setting the last table for the dinner rush, Renee came in carrying an envelope. "Delivery for you," she said, smiling. It was cream-colored with gold lettering across the top, Culinary Foundation Awards, downtown Chicago. I opened it and read the invitation twice. They were honoring small restaurants that had shown resilience and community impact. I didn't think much of it until I reached the bottom. My name was printed there alongside the Heart Table Fellowship. I thought of Grandma immediately. The ceremony was held in late October. The hall shimmered with light, the kind that made everything feel softer. When they called my name, I walked to the stage with the same calm I'd learned from years of kitchen chaos. The presenter spoke about perseverance, integrity, and rebuilding after hardship. I listened, but my eyes found Grandma in the front row. She was smiling, proud but peaceful, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I accepted the award, not as proof that I'd won anything, but that I'd built something that could last. Afterward, Grandma hugged me tight, whispering, "Your table's big enough for anyone who needs it." That night, back at the restaurant, I placed the plaque on the shelf beside the first rose she'd ever brought me. It wasn't just recognition. It was closure, the kind that didn't need an apology to feel complete. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from my mother. The handwriting was careful, as if she'd taken her time. She wrote about reading the newspaper article and watching the interviews online. She said she wasn't asking for forgiveness, only understanding. There was no manipulation this time, no excuses, just honesty wrapped in regret. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I placed the letter in a drawer beside the others I'd kept over the years, the ones that marked where old wounds had started to heal. Evan reached out soon after. He stopped by the restaurant this time, with no pretense of small talk. "I wanted you to know I started therapy," he said, his voice steady. "It's helping." He glanced around the dining room. "You really made something special here." I thanked him. He didn't stay long, but when he left, there was a softness in his shoulders I hadn't seen since we were kids. The holidays came early that year. Customers brought flowers, cards, and homemade ornaments that hung from the window tree near the door. One evening, I noticed a young woman sitting at the counter, her hands fidgeting around a napkin. "First time here," I asked. She nodded. "I read your story," she said. "I just left my family's business. They said I'd fail without them." I poured her coffee and smiled. "Then maybe this is where you start." She laughed quietly, and I watched a little bit of that same hope I'd once lost flicker back into her eyes. By winter, the city was blanketed in white, and the nights came early. Grandma visited every Thursday, her routine never changing tea dessert, and a seat by the window where she could watch the lights. She said she liked the view because it reminded her that good things grow slow. One evening as we locked up, she took my hand. "You did it, Nora," she said. "You didn't just build a restaurant. You built a life that fits you." That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the dining room, listening to the soft creak of wood and the distant hum of the city. The tables gleamed under low light, and the scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. I thought about everything. The silence of that first opening night, the family that never came, the noise that tried to undo me, and the calm that followed when I finally stopped chasing their approval. When I locked the door, snow was falling in slow, steady flakes. The streetlights made them glow as they landed on the sidewalk. I paused for a moment, breathing in the cold air, feeling its sharpness fade into warmth. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was the quiet choice to keep moving forward without bitterness weighing you down. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that real love shows up. It doesn't demand, it doesn't measure it, simply stands beside you when the world turns away. And when it doesn't, you still have the right to build peace for yourself. Now, when I look around this space, I see more than a restaurant. I see the proof that starting over isn't a sign of loss, it's a promise of something honest, something earned. So if you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or told your dream was too small, remember this. Peace is not given by those who once ignored you, it's built by the hands that kept working when they didn't. Thank you for listening to my story. If it reminded you of your own, share it with someone who might need a little light today. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stay close. You're part of the family now.